Round 19, New Zealand Warriors up against the Eels over in Sydney. Do or die game for me. Let's see how this might play out. Hey team, welcome back to the Warriorholic. Apologies for this one being a little bit late this week. Been a bit of a mission dealing with this bloody COVID while I was in Japan and trying to get back to New Zealand here. A little bit behind the 8 ball, but up and ready for action just in time for the weekend. So, bit of a bloody interesting one, this one here. Looks at the latest news there today that SJ might play. Before we saw that announcement, I was a little bit concerned there, to be honest. But, you know, I think with him back there, hopefully, we've got every chance to win this. So, let's take a bit of a look at the stats and have a bit of a look at the team. So as usual, the opposition has a few more wins than us, so it's a good chance for us to get one back on them. They've won both of the last 2 games over the past 2 years quite convincingly, so it'd be good to turn one around on them. Recent form though, they're 5 from 5, going for 6 in a row, whereas we've got the 3 out of our last 5 for wins there. Over the past 5 games, the Eels there with 176 for, 68 against, for a plus 108 points differential over the past 5 rounds is a pretty good effort. Versus ours, we're 142 for, 94 against, with a plus 48. So I think, you know, that looks pretty good when we go up against most teams, but we're a little bit behind the what the Eels have been able to produce over the past few weeks here, so we're going to have to kind of step it up, I think. Average scores there is 35-14 for them and 28-19 for us. So, you know, they've got us on both attack and defence there, so it really is going to take a top performance for us. But as we'll get to see in a moment when we go through the teams, they've got a few players out that should make a bit of a difference for us. So, wins this season, both teams 9 apiece from their 16, so 56% win rate there. Overall points for and against is 444 and 308 against, which is a plus 132 for Parramatta. 346 for, 304 against, for a plus 42 for us. You know, that loss on the weekend by 22 points certainly hurt our points for and against. It's interesting, you know, you look at Parramatta, they sat down quite low on the table for a while there because they hadn't had their buys, but all of a sudden when you get those buys, they start jumping up the ladder quite quickly. So, you know, once they get their players back from Origin, they could be a bit of a smoky here heading into the back end of the season. As far as the performance stats go, completion rates, they're 75%, we're 78%, so pretty much of a muchness here. Tackle efficiency, 87.1 versus 88.6, nothing in that either. Average play of the ball speed, we're ever so slightly faster there with 3.52 seconds per play of the ball versus their 3.78, but again, there's very little in that. So now let's take a quick look at the teams. We've got Chance at the back here up against Sean Russell. Sean Russell's not a known fullback. He's been a bit of a fill-in on the wing and has, I think, played a couple of games there when Gutherson's been out. Just the 9 games in total this season. Talking to one of the Parramatta boys there at the Parramatta Cave podcast, old Troy there, he said he's a bit of a journeyman. Not a lot of people really rate him, but he does seem to do a job. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes up against Chance. We've got the 185 running metres versus 122. So 122 is not the worst in the world. That's generally been playing on the wing though. Tackle efficiency 88.6 versus 78.6. Not too much difference there with the amount of tackles that are actually making at the back there. Tackle break 62 versus 25. Also a reflection in the number of games there. Line breaks though, only 4 line breaks and try assists, for Chance, 4 apiece there versus 6 line breaks for Russell and no try assists. Watching him play in the highlights over the past couple of rounds, he does seem solid enough, but nothing I think we need to be too overly concerned about, unlike a lot of the other guys in their back line. So I'm going to give this one a slight nudge there to Chance just based on his consistent, really high performance this season. Next up, we've got the try-scoring machines. Dallin Watene-Zelezniak against Micah Seaver. 10 games for Dallin and 16 so far for Mike. I think that's obviously every game he's played this season. 163 average metres versus 129, which is kind of surprising because Sivo's a pretty hard man to stop and he's pretty quick, so it's nice to see Dallins up over him on the metres there. Tackle efficiency 65 versus 70. You're probably talking maybe one tackle a game difference here, given how many tackles they make per game. Tackle breaks 37 versus 35. That's also interesting for me considering Dallins only played the 10 games versus a 16. I would have thought Sivo might have had a few more than that. But tries, 12 versus 16, so that's a try a game on average there for Sivo. I think he's the leading try scorer in the NRL at the moment, and he's got a exemplary scoring record there over in Parramatta. I think he's scored in pretty much every home game since that new ground's been open, so it's going to be a battle of the try scorers here. It's going to be tough. Dallins had a few issues on his defence this season, so you don't get too many tougher tasks in this, particularly with the Para guys being able to create a lot of space for their edges. They're quite similar to us, that a lot of their tries come through their centres and wingers, or edge back rowers changing angles there, which I'll get into a little bit more when we get to the forward. So I highly expect Sivo to probably be one of their anytime try scorers. Hopefully he only gets a single and Dallin gets a double here, but I'm going to call this one a pretty much 50-50 based on form, but maybe a slight edge to Sivo purely on the fact of his size and his destructive running up against a guy who's not the best defender in our team. Next up, we've got Montoya up against another large lad in Lumi. I think that's how you say it there. He's only had the one game. He's very solid young man as well. Not quite as tall as Montoya, but it'll be an interesting clash of the bodies when those two meet head to head. So Montoya there with 152 running metres versus a 61, so I don't think Lumi mustn't have played a whole game or something. You'd expect him to have a few more than that. I haven't actually seen him play, to be completely honest. Maybe I saw him in a trial or something, but I haven't seen too much of him. Tackle efficiency 70 versus 88. That's a good tick to Lumi there, because Montoya's missed a couple of tackles over the past few weeks at vital times. What do you got there? Tackle breaks 51 versus 4, but again that's one game versus 16, so but hard to compare. No line breaks and no tries there. Purely on experience and recent form, you've got to give this one to Montoya, hopefully. But from by all accounts, what young Troy reckons, this guy Lumi's not too bad. Seems to have the wheels, so another interesting matchup there. Now where I think we might have a little bit of trouble, getting into the centres. For me, I think one of Parramatta's real strengths is both of their centres are very skillful, strong, hard runners, fast, and probably the linchpins to their back line, up against a couple of guys who I think, whilst I've had relatively okay seasons, I would never go out and say that our centres are our strength at the moment. So it'll be an interesting challenge for Rocco and Pompey this week. So we've got Berry up against Penicini. Those who play super coach and the like probably have a lot of interest in Penicini because he seems to score a lot of points there, both in the virtual footy and in the real footy. So we've got 5 games for Rocco up against 16 for Penicini. Average running of 70 metres versus 138. So 138 is actually one of their higher metre eaters there for the back line for Parramatta. Tackle efficiency of 93.9% for Rocco, so he does get a bit of stick about his defence, but percentage-wise he's actually a pretty high efficiency tackler. Penicini there, 88.6, not bad himself. Tackle breaks just the 9 for Berry in his performances, and 49 for Penicini. Line breaks none versus 11, and 1 try versus 7. So statistically, Penicini's got this all over Rocco. Watching him in both of the last 2 rounds, highlights for Parramatta, like I said, he was a linchpin. It was pretty interesting to see him completely run over the top of Ewan Aiken there to set up one of their tries. So I think Rocco's going to have his handful there, but I like the fact that he's a good legs tackler, so I don't think he'll get bumped off too easily, but and he has got the wheels to kind of turn around and catch him if he goes to get past. But I've got to give this one to Penicini, one of the top centres in the game for me. Next up, Pompey versus Simonson. So Bailey Simonson, I didn't know too much about him before this season, but he's had a really big year. So we've got 16 games for Pompey, 12 for Simonson. 105 metres versus 144, so that's even more than Penicini there. So you can see the big impact both those centres are having. Tackle efficiency 88 versus 85, nothing in that. Tackle breaks 42 for Pompey over versus 41, which is a good sign there, though he's had a couple of extra games. Line breaks 2 for Pompey and 2 tries versus 6 and 8 tries there for Simonson. So I don't know. Pompey's he's dealt with some of the best centres in the comp quite well this season. I don't think he's been dominated too many times. Last week probably wasn't a great example, but other than that, he stood up against guys like Bradman Best, who's now in State of Origin, up against Jesse Ramian, up against the likes of Valentine Holmes, and has come out on top. So, who knows? He could have a big game here and surprise us, but I'm going to give Simonson a slight edge here, purely based on this season's stats and form. Next up, in the 5/8 position, is a really interesting matchup here. We've got young Luke Metcalf, 5 games in now, up against Ryan Madison, 194 centimetres, and I think he's about 115 kg, going up against a guy who's about 1.82 m or something and about 85 kg. So strength versus speed here. I mean, obviously, they'll probably be on the opposite side of the field and have very different impacts on the game. Watching Madison, I was quite surprised. He does have a relatively subtle passing game there, but obviously he's not the fastest across the ground, so he'll be able to sort of use his size and strength to play like the extra middle forward. But he could be burned for speed with both SJ and Metcalf with their agility and acceleration there. So with the kicking meters, obviously it's not really something that's probably the best comparison here. With Metcalf with just a 43, didn't even kick once, I don't think, last weekend, and obviously no kicking meters for Madison, since he's not obviously a recognised half there. Tackle efficiency, both up in the 90s there, which is good to see from Metcalf. Try assist, 1 for Metcalf, 3 for Madison. He actually put a couple of nice passes on last weekend. Not last weekend, when he played in the 5/8 position against Manly, put a couple of guys away there. Line break assists, 1 each, 2 tries for Metcalf and nothing for Madison. So really hard to know what comes of this. I think if Sean does play, look for him to be putting that footwork on Madison and really sort of trying to exploit his probably lack of agility there. But I expect Madison to have a bit of an impact on this one here with his running ability and being able to stand up and attack when offload. So yeah, let's see with that one. I'm not even going to be able to call it because they're such different players. So interestingly, when I initially put this data together here to put into the file, I had Volkman in there because I honestly didn't expect SJ to play, given that his wife's due on the 10th. I thought that he probably would have stayed in New Zealand, but by all accounts, his wife's posted on her Instagram, to the baby to not come while Dad's over in Australia. So hopefully that's a sign that SJ will be playing. So let's see what he's going to go like up against the ex-Warrior there in Dijon Arcee. I'm a big fan of Arcee. I think with what limited time he got for us last season, he showed that he's got some genuine X factor and he's not overruled by the big occasion. I think he's got an outstanding boot on him, both like a big, really long, kicking game, a towering bomb, but he's got a really subtle short game as well. So I was a bit disappointed when we let him go. From a fan of his perspective, I'm glad that he's getting a bit of a run there, but hopefully he doesn't go too well here against our boys. So 16 games for SJ versus the 3 for Arcee this season. 533 kicking meters versus 95. So this is going to be a challenge for him. Obviously taking all of the kicking responsibility without the backup there. No Gutherson there this week to kick either, without a second genuine half to back him up. Whereas with SJ, at least we've got the kicking option there in Metcalf if he does get caught with the ball on the 5th tackle or something. Tackle efficiency 93 versus 87, much of a muchness there. Try assist 16 versus 4. Line break assist 15 versus 2. 6 tries versus none. So I expect a big game from SJ. If he does end up playing on the back of last week's quiet performance, if he is going to be away from his wife, hopefully he'll make it worthwhile and really step up and show that leadership. If we can match them in the forwards and get a little bit more front foot ball compared to what we did last week, you'd like to think SJ can dominate the game. One thing I'd really like to see from him is, being a little bit more mindful in his kicking. It frustrated me a lot with him kicking to Alex Johnston last week all night when they had a debutant on the wing who by all accounts was dropping balls during the pre-game warm-up. So, looking to see how Lumi is under the high ball. We know Sivo's a little bit up and down there, so getting that ball up nice and high so our boys can contest it, put a bit of pressure there. Similar for the fullback Russell there, who's not overly experienced, so hopefully he doesn't get too sort of one-dimensional with his kicking. But I'm going to give him the edge there, purely based on experience and overall form this season. Alrighty, next up, battle with the big boys here. Adam Whenua-Blake up against Ogden. Both very large fellas. 16 games versus just the 6 there. So obviously Regan Campbell-Ginnard out there playing for New South Wales is a big out for the Para team. But Ogden's a solid enough player. He's a big boy, so be an interesting matchup there. Adam Whenua-Blake averaging 165 metres, 996 post-contact metres so far this season versus 129 average and only the 308 post-contact. Tackle efficiency both in the 90s there. Tackle breaks 48 versus 8. We've got 6 games there versus 16, which has an impact on that. 5 tries versus 1. You'd hope Adam will dominate this matchup, but I think it's more we'll all be looking to see him up against Paulo, who'll be smarting from being dropped from New South Wales. Very big lump of a lad as well. Leads their forward pack, so I'm really curious to see how those two go head to head, but of this direct battle, I'd expect Adam to slightly dominate that one. So we've got Bunty up against Junior Paulo, who will, like I said, he'll be smarting. He'll be wanting to make a statement. One of the most experienced players there with the Origin boys out, so I highly expect him to be really leading from the front. So Bunty's defence during that first, 20-minute exchange is going to be really important. Like I've said, I think that's where we see his strength at the moment is, doing a lot of that tackling work, taking on their forwards on defence to allow Adam just that little bit of reserve there to use his energy later in the game, but also on attack. So 16 games for Bunty versus 12 for Paulo. Running metres 60 versus 152, so hard to compare those two stats. 328 post-contact metres versus 679. So, when you look at the post-contact metres Adam's getting, getting close to 1,000 metres, I'm kind of surprised that Paulo doesn't have more. But I dare say he'll be looking to get a few extra metres this weekend. 97% tackle efficiency at the moment for Bunty. He's doing a really good job. He's had a couple of games up around the 100 mark versus 92, which is a solid effort there from Paulo as well. Tackle breaks 12 versus 31, 1 try versus 2. Probably one of the things we're going to have to be really careful here of is Paulo's offload. Very difficult man to tie that ball up on, as are a lot of their forwards. They're probably the most prolific offloading team in the comp. So watching the past 2 games highlights, there's so many of their tries are off the back of second phase ball coming from their offload. So we're going to have to be really, really strong on that. Tie them up, particularly when we get down into our they're getting down into our red zone there. I'm going to give this one to Paulo. I'm actually a big fan of his, even though he's in the enemy team this week. I expect him to have a big one, and Bunty just has been struggling a little bit there to have that impact that I've been looking for. Wade Egan up against Brendan Hands. So this is another one that's kind of an interesting matchup. I don't know too much about Hands. He's only been had a handful of games there with Hodgkinson out with his injury there. Hodgkinson, mate, the Pommy boy. So we've got 12 games versus 3. Average running meters 51 versus 69. So from what I did see of him, he's pretty quick out of dummy half there. He's kind of a, he reminds me of Egan when he actually first came into the Warriors. He's a nippy player. He's solid enough. Not someone that maybe stands out that people will be wanting to run out and try and recruit, but I'd say he's going to develop into a fairly handy hooker. And by the sounds of it, the Para fans are quite confident he's probably the long-term option there now with Marnie gone and with Hodgkinson with his constant injuries there. Tackle efficiency, both in the mid-90s there. Try assists, 1 apiece. Line break assists, 4 versus 2. 5 tries versus 1. Egan didn't have his best game last week and was a little quiet as well the week before. But I'd really like to see him step up hugely this week and try and dominate the middle there. He'll get through a power of work on defence, but I just really need him to really take control of that ruck. And if our forwards, we're going to have to match them in the middle, because if we can't, it's going to give their backs a lot of room to run with, and that could be really destructive for us with that, the centre combination they've got. So hoping Egan can really keep things tight there and get our forwards on a roll and dominate the young fella there. So this is another one of their strengths here, getting into the second row, particularly when you look at their bench as well. So we've got Jackson Ford up against Bryce Cartwright. A lot of people weren't huge fans of him over recent years, but I think this season he's been really, really solid. Another tall, lanky guy who's got an offload in him. 16 games for him versus 14 for Ford. Ford up there around the 100 metre mark now per game, with a slight more there of 113 out of Cartwright. Both around the 90% tackle efficiency, 5 line breaks, 27 tackle breaks versus 7 line breaks, 17 tackle breaks. So I think Ford's a little bit more of a destructive runner. However, Cartwright's got a really good offload on him. He's got those long levers, so it can be a little bit hard to tie up there. So that'll be interesting to see how Ford handles him. And they've both got a try in them. I think Ford has been trending up. Last week he had a pretty solid game, even in a losing effort. So I'd like to see him slightly get ahead of Cartwright on this one here, because we're going to really need him to, with Niokoro out again this week and without Curran. Next up, we've got Mitch Barnett against Andrew Davey, if he does end up starting instead of Sean Lane. I wasn't a huge fan of Barnett going on to the edge last week. I prefer him in the middle. I like him coming off the bench there as that impact player. But with Curran out with his suspension, Niokoro out there with his suspension there, Jazz not available, there are not a lot of choices. I'd honestly quite like to see Zion Mayu sneak onto the bench there instead of Lussick at the last minute, but I doubt that'll happen, to bring us a little bit more impact there, because I think it's a bit of a shame to have Barnett tied up on the edge there. I'm not sure it's his strength anymore. I'd rather see him in the middle there putting on those big hits, but we shall see. So he's only had the 6 games. Davies only had the 8. Average 125 metres for Barnett versus 74, so he gets a slight nudge there, both in the 90s with their tackle efficiency. 4 line breaks, 5 tackle breaks versus 1 line break, 10 tackle breaks, 0 tries versus 2. So on experience and aggression, I like Barnett to get up over this one here. However, once Lane comes on, if he ends up on Barnett's edge, it might be a little bit of a mission for him to tie up, particularly with those extra long levers. Power seemed to grow an extra leg when Lane comes on, so I'm not sure which side he'll go on to, but if it is on Barnett's side, I really hope he can step up and contain him, because if he gets a bit of a break on, gets those levers away and gets some offloads to the centres outside, and we could be in a bit of trouble. Next up, we've got another good matchup here at 13 with Tohu up against Jermaine Hopoate. So another guy who's really sort of stood up this year and made a bit of a name for himself, Hopoate. Played all 16 games for them versus 13 for Tohu. Both right on the 130 metre mark, average per game. Both in the 90s there for their tackle efficiency. Both sitting on an average of 38 tackles a game, so they're both workhorses. 8 tackle breaks versus 20 tackle breaks there, so he's a little bit more dynamic with his running than Tohu. He doesn't ball play quite as much as Tohu does. He's a little bit more of a runner himself. More of that sort of the lock that we've seen over the past, up until about 2 years ago, where we almost had like the lock playing the third prop. So he's not quite the same ball playing kind of player as Tohu there, but he's got a try in him. He's not a huge guy, but he seems to just have that power beyond his sort of size. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Papali'i, Isaiah Papali'i, with the way he doesn't look that big, but just really, really manages to break through tackles. So, I think Tohu was a little bit lethargic last week. He looks just a little bit tired, probably struggling from those knees, but I really need him to step up and match this young fella because he can get a good roll on for them. So, I've got to give it to my man Tohu. He's our leader. He stepped up every game, even though he's had a couple of slightly down, off games over the past couple of weeks, I feel. But his off games, the gap between those and his best games aren't very big, so I hope he can get up over him. The bench is a little bit of a concern for me. Not that they've necessarily got the greatest bench in the world themselves, but I feel like we're a bit light. We were definitely too light last week. It's by all accounts it's dry conditions this week in Parramatta there, so we shouldn't have to sort of play such a sort of middle battle like we had up against the South Pack last week. But we've got Sirenen, Walker, Ali and Lussick there. Like I said, I'd kind of like Lussick to drop off there and bring Zion Mau for a bit more size and impact. I really doubt that'll happen, but that would be something I'd like to see. By playing Lussick, I guess, that's a sign that they really want to play a fast, high-intensity game and try and tire out some of these big Para forwards, but we shall see. Para, they've got Moretti, Ofahengawe, Lane and Makatoa. So a couple of Kiwi boys in there, and Ofahengawe and Makatoa. Lane with his former Warriors connection there. So it's a little bit of an interesting mix-up. But they're all pretty much back rowers / props for the Para team. All relatively solid guys. Moriarty's not the hugest guy in the world. But Ofahengawe's a big boy. Lane's, I think he's over 2 metres. Very much more solid than when he was playing for us back in the day. And I quite like Makatoa, like the Plymouth boy there. Getting a name for himself over at Parramatta. He's 14 games in this year. Sort of reminds me a little bit of a younger version of Niokore actually. So it's good to see the Kiwi boys getting a run, but again, a much bigger bench. Very much, middle and edge forward centric, but I'd say there'll be a lot of rotation with them through the swapping the middles, but Lane going onto an edge there who can, like I mentioned, could cause havoc. So normally I rate us to have the bigger impact off the bench. I do like the fact that Walker will bring the speed there. Obviously Lussick will as well. Sirenen gives us a diversity, and Ali's the high energy guy up the guts, but just a little bit concerned this week. Pop Jazz in there instead of Lussick, or you put Curran in there instead of Lussick. I think it has a very different look about it. If you could have Niokore in there and have Barnett, Jazz and Curran or someone on the bench, it looks very different for us. So this week I'm a little bit concerned, but like I always say, in Webby I trust. To summarise up, where do we sit with this? We've got to control the offloads. We've got to be really, really tight in our centres and our edges and our wingers there, because that's where all the Para tries come from. Is those little changes in direction between the centre back inside to the edge back rowers getting through a little hole, offloading there, creating the second phase ball. They get a lot of tries through their centres, or the centre is able to put the big Micah Seaver away. So we're really going to have to stop this coming up out of the line, like we saw in the weekend there with SJ coming up early, putting Rocco in 2 minds where he comes up. Then that leaves us, with that overlap with Dallin out wide. We've really got to stick to our guns, focus on our position, man up, and control those centres and edges. Without that, it could get a little bit messy because, Para is scoring up around 30 points a game and defending pretty well. We saw last week we struggled to score points in the wet. Hopefully that's not the case this week. I really hope the boys learnt some big lessons, felt the pain of that win and can turn it around, because there's a lot of fans starting, the fringe fans starting to get squeaky bum time. We lose this week, we sort of might even drop, or we will probably drop out of the 8 for the first time in a long while. So if we get that win, we stay up there ahead of Para, could put us up, even 5th or 6th. If we don't, we drop out. So it's a real high pressure game for both teams. I've got to rate the boys with SJ in there to get it done. A little bit nervous, but looking forward to it. Hopefully I'll be completely over this bloody COVID so I can sit down and enjoy it properly, but we shall see. Exciting times. Definitely hope SJ's on that plane either today or tomorrow, whenever they actually head over. Hope he has a massive game. Hope he shows Arcee that he is the man, leads the way, and we get by. I don't care how much we win by or how we win, we're just going to get those 2 points. I'm the Warriorholic. I'm still all in, suffering a bit, but can't wait for the weekend. Enjoy.